Thank you for joining us today for the What Sales Can Learn From interview series. I am your host, Carole Mahoney, the founder of Unbound Growth. Now, if you're like me and believe that everything is selling, then you know that selling is a part of everyday life. Whether you're in a traditional sales role, or if you're an entrepreneur who's trying to get investors or hire employees, or even if you're an employee who is trying to convince others of your ideas, abilities, and vision, we are all in sales. And if we're all in sales, we should be able to learn from each other. To truly learn, we need to look outside of our own world to get a different perspective on our own. That is why once a month, I will be talking with sales experts in other industries and professions and asking them to share with you how they've tackled tough challenges so that we can learn from their experiences and apply it to sales. Here we go. Thanks everyone for joining me for What Sales Can Learn From. Today's episode is What Sales Can Learn From a Teacher. I am joined by Matt Miller, who is a teacher, blogger, and presenter that has infused technology and innovative teaching methods in his classes for more than 10 years. He is the author of the book, Ditch That Textbook, Free Your Teaching and Revolutionize Your Classroom, and writes at the Ditch That Textbook blog about using technology and creative ideas in teaching. He's a Google certified instructor, a BAMI Top to Watch in 2016, and the winner of the WTHI TV Golden Apple Award. Onletica named him one of the top 10 influencers in educational technology and e-learning worldwide. I was recently inspired by Matt when we were talking about how we actually get people to learn and inspire them to learn. And all of the things that we were talking about, I was finding so relate to what I tell sales managers around what they need to do. Matt, say hi. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, and thank you so much, Carole, for having me on. I am super excited to talk about this.
I know, we love, and that was the thing too, like we were getting together, we were doing some training together, and as soon as the subjects of learning and the science of learning and how people actually learn came up, it was like, we were like, oh my gosh, that's what I say all the time. So I figured we had to record this for posterity's sake.
Yes, absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about your origin story. How did you actually get into teaching to begin with?
Yeah, so I was not your traditional education major in college. I wasn't the kid who lined up all of their stuffed animals and taught lessons to them when they were 5 years old. You know, that was not me. Mm-hmm. I was a journalism major in college, and I thought, beyond the shadow of a doubt, I was going to be a newspaper reporter or a newspaper editor. And I got into college. I did all the internships. I did all the things I was supposed to do. Got out in the real world. Got a job doing county government, covering county government. Mm-hmm. I hated it. Hated it. It was, you get out there and you realize something just is not for you. This job was not me at all. And whenever I covered things in schools, whenever I went out and did stories about schools, I just always felt at home. I couldn't put my finger on why, but I felt at home in schools. And my wife was a junior high social studies teacher. And so it was like one thing after another. I started to realize the thing I loved about journalism the most was coaching other writers, which is teaching. So yeah, long story short, I went back to school. I started studying to become a teacher. I was in my own classroom full of students in less than a year. And so I was kind of thrown to the wolves and, trial by fire and all of that stuff. And it's been kind of a whirlwind experience to get me into it, but I'm so glad that I did. Yeah.
And it's funny, it's a lot of times when I'm talking to sales managers, sometimes the reason that they get into sales management is that joy of seeing others learn. And for a lot of them though, they don't get to do enough of that. And they're inundated with the different things that they say that they should be doing, but not necessarily. And I think that was the other thing you and I had in common too. We both initially went to college to go into journalism. I was firmly convinced I was going to be Lois Lane. Mm-hmm. I ended up somehow getting into marketing and then into sales. So don't ask me how I got there.
Doesn't that make you cooler than Lois Lane now?
I guess, well, I've got the leather jacket to prove it. So hopefully.
Nice, yes.
So at what point did you decide that you needed to write the book about ditching the book?
Yes. So this came very much out of my own teaching, where after teaching in the classroom for 4 or 5 years, I was doing the traditional thing,
Mm-hmm.
the way that I had been taught before and the way that people had been taught for decades and decades and decades. And it was that the textbook was the focal point of the class, and that we would work our way through the chapters and do the discussion questions at the end. I did that for a little while, and in my high school Spanish classes, I started to realize that my students couldn't speak Spanish. I was doing all the things I was supposed to do, and I was not getting any of the results.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to realize those textbooks were very much in the way. And in a moment, I sort of wrestled with this for a while. And in a moment of what I call calculated frustration, like it had been building and building, and then all of a sudden something just snapped. And I told one class of my students, I said, everybody go put your textbooks up. And it was that one of those, like Cortez sinking the ships moment, like if I put the ships on the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, I wouldn't go back to them.
Right.
And so after that, it was just a lot of figuring out what I believed about education and how I should go forward. And, so by throwing out my textbooks, I was throwing out the textbook way of teaching too, and was taking some risks and trying some things that nobody else in my building was doing. And as some of it started to slowly work and I started to figure some of it out, I thought, my goodness, I've learned from so many other people through their blogs and through their YouTube videos and podcasts and everything. I feel like it's my turn to give back. I don't have all the answers, but I at least have something that I can share, my own unique experience. And that's really where the book came from. It was my turn to give back, to complete the cycle of get help, give help, and repeat.
Yeah. And I really want to get in a little bit more to some of those things that you tried and that you did, but also pointing out how many managers that I talk to that say, I've given them every answer to every question. We've gone through the book. We've gone through all of these things. And at the end of it, they go through a training in 2 or 3 days or a week, and they still can't sell.
Yeah.
My students still don't know Spanish. So this is something I think that we see happening, not just in teaching, but in sales and marketing, and in a lot of industries, this kind of disruption of attention is happening.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I've got to think that for sales managers working with their salespeople and for salespeople working with their clients, a lot of times you think, I told them in very clear, specific words what it is that they needed to know. But of course, if we're experts at it and it comes so easily in our brains, when you've got to introduce something like that to somebody else, in my case, it was high school freshmen learning how to conjugate verbs in Spanish. But for a salesperson, it might be educating them about a new product. And there's all of these million things going on in their brain while they're trying to take it in. Salespeople learning from their managers, or clients learning from their salespeople.
Right.
And not only are they trying to gather information, they're also trying to fit it into their paradigm of what their business looks like. And they're also having their BS meter go off, like in the background. And they're going, is this too good to be true? And with all of that noise in your brain, it's like, hey, I need to slow down. And I found that so much in the classroom too. I could conjugate a verb as well as anybody. I could speak fluent Spanish, but my students couldn't. And I realized that I needed to slow the pace down, and I needed to try to put myself on their level instead of going at a level that I was comfortable with.
And I love what you just said there, because it's so important. As managers, a lot of times they've risen through the ranks, they've become top salespeople, then they become the lead of the team. And sometimes they forget that what it was like when you first started out, so that the things that now seem so easy to you, it's hard for you to understand why it's not easy for someone else. It's like the other side of the Dunning Kruger effect that not a lot of people talk about. They talk about the, inexperience leads to overconfidence, but they don't talk about the reverse of that, where it's the more experience you have, the harder it is to sometimes teach, because you can't understand why they don't get it.
Yes. That's so true. That's why whenever I get done with a training, or whenever I've gotten done working with teachers or doing whatever, if I can get that feedback from people and I could say, hey, what do you actually remember from what I just said? If I get done with a keynote speech, what do you actually remember? And it kind of puts them on the spot, and they feel bad when they say, well, I don't know. And if you prod them a little bit, maybe you'll get something. But that's like the true indication that you have actually taught something, that someone has actually learned something from you. And it's hard if you don't remember where they are, and you don't put yourself in their place. There's another thing, you mentioned Dunning Kruger. I'm going to mention cognitive load theory too.
Mm-hmm.
Cognitive load theory just says that your working memory only has so much capacity. Your working memory, obviously, it's kind of like the RAM in your computer. It's kind of like your hands. If you're trying to, move something or clean up your house, you can only hold so much here. And once that's full, then it's full. And
Mm-hmm.
so whenever we pile too much stuff on top of them at once, instead of dumping all of those things on them, what if we selectively give them the things that they can actually hold, knowing that they can't hold an infinite number of things?
Yeah. Focus on one thing. One of the things that I say to sales managers a lot, that as coaches, you're teachers. And as teachers, you've got to focus on one thing at a time to help them improve. Like if you say, okay, do this now, do this. Now, after you're done doing that, do this. They're still trying to figure out what you said in the first thing.
Mm-hmm.
You've already given them 3 other things to do. I've learned that the hard way with my own kids, and trying to tell them how to, clean the bathroom. So what do you do, like with the kids who don't want to clean the bathroom, with the salespeople who maybe don't want to learn, or with the buyers who maybe don't want to learn? What are some of the things that you can do in your role as a teacher to either inspire them to learn or try to get them to see things differently?
Yeah. I've always fallen back on that commonly used definition of insanity. Doing the same thing to get a different result is insanity, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I've seen it, walking up and down the hallways of my school and looking into classrooms and seeing the kids looking like this. And every day I walk by, they look like this. They're just totally disconnected, and the teacher's standing in the front doing the exact same thing. And I go, how is this possible? I heard somebody say once that if things aren't going the way that you want, and I think this applies in sales if you're not getting the results that you want, definitely goes in education if your students aren't learning in the way that they want. They say, there are things you can control and there are things you can't control. What you can't control are the students. And, in schools, a lot of times we like to think that we can punish kids into things or we can coerce them into things. Mm-hmm. But the reality is that, they may comply until you're gone. But are we actually changing their hearts? And so the real only thing that I think that I can do to affect that is to change myself. I only have control of myself. And so that's where I'm going to try to do the proverbial lead the horse to water, and make it want to drink instead of trying to dunk its face into the water. That's kind of illegal in schools too, by the way, I believe. So,
I'm pretty sure it's illegal in corporate as well. Pretty much illegal.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that's the thing that I've always tried to do is how can I see things from the student's perspective, or in this case, how can I see things from the buyer's perspective and see what is it that they need, what's going to engage them, what's going to catch their eye. And we try different things. And I kind of feel like in the classroom, when we do this, it's almost like we're taking on the role of a scientist. Mm-hmm. A scientist creates a hypothesis and does tests. And then they look at the results. And if the results were successful, they figure out why it was so they can use that strategy again. Mm-hmm. And then if it wasn't successful, they try to figure out why so that they can learn from it and move on. And I've always felt like my chances of trying something new, looking at the results, taking the good from the good and learning from the bad, that I have so much better chance of reaching my students, or in this case, reaching the clients, than if I continue to do the same thing over and over again that's had mediocre results in hopes that maybe this time it'll be better.
Yeah. And that's one of the things too. And I think one of the things that happens to managers, and maybe this happens to teachers as well, is that they'll look at the results and say, okay, I didn't get what it is that I was looking for, but they have no idea how they even got there to know what it is that they need to go back and tweak. So they're just looking at the results. And, in some sales managers, it's like, okay, you didn't meet your quota last month. What are you going to do to meet it this month? Is not exactly teaching.
Right. Exactly.
And fear definitely doesn't work. And I talk to managers a lot about having an understanding of what's going to motivate and drive that person to make any kind of behavioral changes, because that's the only way it's going to happen.
Yeah. That's so. Can I touch on that real quick? Yeah. That I think a lot of times in schools, students are like this. And I think that, children in schools, they obviously grow up to be adults in the workforce, and whether we're big or we're little, a lot of the same stuff happens. And they look at those results. You get this test back, and you've got an F and it's like bleeding red ink. Or you get your standardized test scores back and you're below, you're in this low percentile, and all of a sudden they start to take it upon themselves as like personal defeat. And then it becomes part of their identification of themselves. And focusing on those results, just like you said, don't get them anywhere. Giving them some strategies they can try to improve. Again, looking at it like that scientist. Let's try something else and see if it works. And if it does work, great. And if it doesn't work, let's learn from it. Like, that's actually constructive. That's actually going to drive change. Sometimes talking about the results and being frustrated about the results and venting about the results makes you feel better. It doesn't actually change the results.
It actually sometimes makes them worse.
It does. You're right.
And I have seen in students, and I've seen it in salespeople, where they get put on plan, is what they call it, in the sales world. And when they get put on plan, a lot of times it's just a precursor to them leaving because they are disheartened. They're like, this is, the last ditch effort. It's like, it's overwhelming. And so they've got that cognitive overload going on. Yeah. And they just regress. And a lot of times what happens too is I call it the cognitive dissonance between this is where they are, this is where they want to be. There's a gap there. And those who have a personally meaningful goal will do whatever it takes to bridge the gap. But if they haven't identified that goal, that motivator for themselves, they're going to retreat into the information that they have of themselves, of being better than they actually are. And they'll make excuses and these other things. One of the things that I heard you speak on, and that really rang with me, because a lot of times in sales, we're talking about getting and coaching to the results and coaching to the opportunity. And I heard you talk about one of the things that changed for you is that you realized that it's not just a student trying to pass a test, there's a person there. There's these things that are going on that are affecting them. And I was talking with another gentleman over the last week, Andy Paul, who he talks about, if you really want to get to the results that you're looking for and coaching to the opportunities and helping the students to learn, that you have to also consider the person that's behind this and their abilities and their confidence and all of those things. That it's not about them studying for the test, it's about them learning the material in a way that's natural to them. So how do you see that with when you saw that change, or when you realized that, what was the precursor there?
There was a moment where that became so clear to me. And it was, again, I was a high school Spanish teacher, and I was teaching I think this was a Spanish 2 class. And part of that, their end of semester grade was that they had to do a presentation in front of the class. And I had this one student, and she was super quiet. She dressed a little differently than everybody else did. You might consider it kind of like the goth look, lots of black, lots of, like torn stuff, and the crazy makeup and the wild colored hair and everything. But she was real quiet. And I knew that, deep down inside, I knew that that doing this presentation on the outside was not really her style. It wasn't really going to reach her as an individual, but I stuck to my guns. And I said, look, you got to do this. You got to get over it, and you got to go. And it was just like what you were saying earlier. It's like looking at the results and saying, here's this gap. I want you to fly. It's like, here's the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
You need to get over here. I don't know how you're going to get over there, but you better find a cape, find a plane, find a helicopter, something. Get over that Grand Canyon over to the other side. And what'd she do? Dug her heels in.
Yeah.
Said, I'm not going to do it. And I said, hey, you're going to bring these other 2 or 3 kids on your group down with you. I thought, certainly that's going to do it. She's like, not going to do it. I said, hey, you've got to get over this. Eventually you're going to have to talk to more than one person at some point in your life, no matter what it is that you do. Not going to do it. Not going to do it. Not going to do it. And instead of trying to find a middle ground and help her figure out a way to get to what we needed. And the thing is that I taught a Spanish class. I wasn't teaching a public speaking class. What I really needed to know was her mastery of her skills in Spanish. So if I'd been able to meet her halfway, if I had found her a donkey so she could cross through the Grand Canyon instead of trying to fly over the top of it, then we both would have been better off. She would have had a better experience. After that, it was over. She took a couple more years of Spanish with me, but only because she had to, and there was never, ever another connection. So that was one place where I really started to see that myself.
Yeah. So we've talked about people a bit. Let's switch a little bit and talk about technology. And I hate to say switch too, because I'm a firm believer in what you're saying about the science. Life is an experiment, whether we're talking teaching or sales or, finding your spouse and soulmate, parenting, all a grand experiment. Just then once you realize that, the anxiety levels start to diminish a little. But let's talk a little bit about the technology, because we're living in a day and age where we're heard this promise that technology is going to save us time. It's going to make us more productive. We're going to rule the world and change the world. And here we are, inundated with technology. Our attention spans are getting shorter. Has it really aided and helped in our learning and human experience? Or is the article that says the internet has made us stupid actually true?
I think there's probably some truth. Now, this is coming from someone who trains teachers on how to use technology meaningfully in the classroom. Yeah. This is someone who's been a gadget geek and a tech geek since he was little. I had an Atari, and when I went to college, I took notes on a Palm Pilot. And
yep, me too.
Right. Yeah. So has the internet and has technology made us stupider? I think if you want to take a real pessimistic look at it, I think maybe it has in some ways. However, we are so young in this whole technology internet revolution. I mean, you don't have to look back very far to see where all of this really starts to take off. I think we don't give ourselves enough credit because we're still trying to figure out what life is like, with smartphones and the internet and Netflix binges, Bachelor, what is life like with all of these things? And I think that maybe we've tried to pick it up too quickly, and maybe we haven't been judicious enough about it. But I have learned a couple of things about using it in the classroom that I think crosses over, because a lot of the teachers that I work with in the classroom, there's a wide variety. You've got the brand new ones who you assume are tech savvy, where that's not always necessarily a good assumption, but they're still young and they know how to do Snapchat and Instagram. So everybody always just assumes they're tech savvy.
Yeah, and then you've got the ones who executive makes that assumption whenever they hire a millennial. They must know technology.
Exactly. Can you help me fix my iPhone? There's right. That young kid that can help me fix my iPhone.
Yeah, exactly.
All the way to the ones that are getting ready to retire, where you just assume that they're not tech savvy because they haven't come up with it. And I've found that in that wide spectrum, that wide range, if you try to figure out this whole technology thing, you're going to feel overwhelmed.
Oh, yeah.
Because nobody ever figures out this whole technology thing. I mean, right now I am in my office surrounded by devices. I've got a ridiculous interactive monitor back behind me. I have 2 screens right here. I have a smartphone. I have all of this stuff around me. I still haven't figured it all out, but there's a difference. The difference is that I have found little things that can help me be better than I was before, and I've adopted those things. See, I think sometimes we get stuck in that stigma of I have to be techie, I have to be tech savvy, I have to be a geek to figure all of this out. That's not true, That's like looking back at the days when they started using Xerox machines. And it's like, I've got to be Xeroxy to be able to do that. No, you've just got to be willing to put the paper on the thing and hit the button. It's like, if it's something that's going to help solve a problem for you, then you pick that one little thing up. So maybe we start small, and maybe we start finding those little individual things that can help us instead of trying to take on the whole thing. And I think if we can keep our focus on the things that make us better and try to eliminate some of the noise that doesn't, then maybe that's starting to be on the path to figuring this whole technology thing out.
Yeah, it's so often that I find people are looking for technology to solve a process problem, or they're looking for technology to do something that they wish they should be doing or could be doing, but not really doing. And really, like you said, if you can identify where are the areas that I'm repeating things, or maybe even things that can help me work a little bit faster in my workflow and process, It
Mm-hmm.
has to start with knowing what that is. Otherwise, you're going to get distracted by the shiny ball that's bouncing everywhere and not really actually getting anywhere.
Right.
So in terms of when you're looking at technology, how do you think sales leaders can keep technology overload to a minimum? Because I have seen that there is a trend when you talk about the choice between investing in technology and investing in the development of people, most of them are going to go for the technology. Why do you think that they're doing that, given that we're all so overloaded with technology anyway?
Yeah. I think everybody has these shiny, beautiful, aspirational views of what technology can do. I see it in the classroom in the exact same way, only it manifests itself a little differently. You see teachers and they get all of this technology in their classroom. Maybe there are, one device for one student, or maybe there's a cart of iPads that they can use or whatever. And the teachers get out their lesson plan books and they look at all those activities that they've done before and they think, oh, I'm just going to take a little bit of this technology fairy dust and I'm just going to sprinkle it on these old lessons that I've always done. And I think something magical is going to happen. And what happens is you get the same old junk, only now it's digital.
Yeah.
So now it's digital junk instead of transformation.
Oh, yes.
So I think when you say, if you've got the choice between developing people and adding technology, for goodness sake, develop people. Because these devices that we carry around in our pockets are so versatile that they can do, even without complicated software or apps or anything, they can take us to higher levels without having to sink a ton of money into things. I'm still shocked at in the classroom, but also in the business that I run, how some of the simple tools that have been around forever, like you got Office 365. For me, it's Google Apps anymore. I'm big on docs and slides and sheets and Google.
Yeah, me too.
And right. And there are so many versatile ways you can use those. I used to look at like, how can I use HubSpot to help keep track of my my speaking presentations and when they are and where they are in the sales process. And I had all the little buckets that I could move them over to and everything. And it was on a different place than what I was used to. And I thought, my goodness, I think a spreadsheet could do this. I started using a little bit of conditional formatting and data validation. And I came up with this cool spreadsheet that did just as well, if not better. And you tell somebody, the secret weapon in my technology arsenal is Google Sheets. And people are going to roll their eyes at you.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's not sexy, but it's not really about using the sexy technology. It's about finding what works. And how often is it in life and in business and in everything that the simpler the solution, the simpler the effective solution, we need an effective solution, the simpler, the better, that works so much better than a complex, flashy, sexy option.
Yeah. And then that was going to be my next question is, what are some of the things that leaders need to look at? And I think you answered it, is looking at what are the problems that you're trying to solve for. And, it doesn't have to be this great, big, huge solution to solve for this one simple thing. Sometimes it's as easy as a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And I'm also a huge Google spreadsheet fan myself. And my husband comes downstairs and he looks, he's like, I don't even know what that is.
Yeah. That's a good spreadsheet, by the way, if you can't even recognize that it's a spreadsheet.
Yeah, exactly.
To kind of piggyback on that, if I could, one thing that I love about those too is that a lot of those tried and true apps, like docs and slides and sheets, they've been around for a long time. They've been developed on for a while. They've gotten lots of customer feedback and they've added lots of features based on that feedback. So if you try to bring in flashy brand new technology, it might be buggy. The user interface might not be so good. But sometimes those tried and true things are really, really useful. And to finish up this thought, there's one other place that I think that we need to look at more and more and more, and that is using our voice. Voice recognition is so good these days. In fact, my Android phone just had a new kind of like voice typing rollout, and now it transcribes even faster and it'll do it offline. And you know how they say that you can speak X number of times faster than you can write. And if we continue to type with our thumbs, for me, my fat thumbs that are always hitting the wrong keys, that's a real easy way to improve your productivity. I think the big barrier, though, that I've found is that people have to get over hearing themselves talk, even with other people in the room. If you can get over yourself and try this, that's one little thing that I think can save you a ton of time.
Yeah, I think so. And in context too of learning, like you're right, you don't always need the big flashy technology to do that. Sometimes it's simple apps that you already have on your phone. And just also that being present with the students, in this case, the salespeople, if you're a manager and you're teaching, coaching them, meeting them where they are. These are such an important lesson in not just teaching and in sales, but really in life. So I want to close on one thing, and this is really something that I've been talking with a lot more executives about. And that is, like since the 90s, they've been talking about learning organizations. And yes, I totally just use the air quotation marks because we see this as this way, and we've touted it as this way to continuously improve. And it's something I think a lot of companies strive to do, but often fail at because they look at data and technology as we're a learning organization because we make data-driven decisions, but they're not even really budgeting and training and coaching sales teams. And they're doing so at such a dismal amount. It's like throwing a pebble to stop an open dam of water. So it doesn't seem like there's really this big commitment to learning. So what can executives learn from education about how to create a learning culture that has expectations of students, but also meeting students where they are?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of crossover with this with standardized testing. You hear so much about standardized test scores, and we inside of education know that kids are more than the sum of their test scores. And if we want to prepare them for the world, then being able to fill in the right dot on a bubble sheet isn't necessarily a good measure of that. So then I think we have to look at what is it that's going to prepare them and what's going to motivate them. I always love to come back to Dan Pink's book, Drive. I look at those three big things: mastery, autonomy, and purpose. Mastery, trying to get better at something to the highest levels; autonomy, having the freedom to pursue something; and then purpose, going after something that's bigger than yourself. And so I think when it comes to, what you were discussing before, I think that if we want to get those higher levels of motivation and drive the culture so that people want to go and they want to do their best work, they've got to want to do their best work and not be in fear of retribution for doing their least work. So I think if we can set all of those up, those known drivers, this is it's like what Dan Pink says in his book. He says, what business doesn't match up to what science knows. And so I think we've got to change our mindset on that a little bit on, are we really motivating people in ways that we know human beings are motivated, or are we just sticking to what we've always done before?
Yeah. Are we motivating them? Are we teaching them? Are we training them? Or are we just doing what we've always has been done to us, which hasn't been rooted in science and has always been, well, this is how they did it in my company, in my previous company, in my previous school. And it just continues that insanity like we started talking about in the beginning. So thank you so much for joining me today, Matt. There's tons of lessons here for both salespeople and sales leaders and executives who can definitely learn from your wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much for joining me on what sales can learn from a teacher.
My pleasure. Thanks, Carole.
Stay tuned for our next episode by subscribing to the Sales Experts channel or the Unbound Growth blog and YouTube channel. Let's continue the conversation there or on the Sales Experts LinkedIn group. Check the attachments for links to both and to follow our guests on social media and their websites. Until next time.